Welcome to the Global Tech Leaders Podcast, where we help business leaders and individual contributors with actionable insights to hit their number and figure out the nuances of truly operating a business globally today, squeezing the essence of the lessons learned from the planet's top tech leaders. This is your guide to joining the fast track to global market scaling.
Welcome, I'm Ross Lauder, your host from Single Focus Talent, and I'm joined by our non-exec director, John Quigley, today.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Today we are joined by Dan Murray, president at Creator IQ. I'm very excited to have Dan on today's show. Dan's had an illustrious career as a VP at Yahoo and wrote recently CFO at Fantdango, as well as Dollar Shave Club, which our listeners will be familiar with. So welcome to today's show, Dan.
Hey, thanks very much, Ross. It's great to speak to you and John.
So I guess let's dive right in. Really keen to understand, your own career, what's brought you to where you are today, and kind of some of the decisions that you've made along the way that have kind of shaped your career. Would you take us through that?
Yeah, sure. I think some of the decisions that I made, it's easier to look back and say, in retrospect, these were decisions, but sometimes they just happened to be. But the way I looked in looking back in time, I see my career in three major phases. The first phase was where I was developing functional skills. So, I started at a finance undergraduate degree, worked in finance for a few years, and then got my MBA. And then post MBA, worked at Quaker Oats, the food company, in a finance role. So a lot of just learning from my bosses, my peers, about the fundamentals of finance. And that phase one of my career, it lasted about 12 years. And that's one thing that, when talking to people, I encourage not bypassing that phase one, because it's the foundation upon which you build your career. And then the next phase of my career was about continuing to acquire those functional skills, but also applying those skills. So as a leader, as a first-time manager, but also broadening beyond just the functional finance area into broader business arena. So at that time of my career, I moved to China, and that was in the mid-90s, and helped Quaker Oats start up a business in China. Later, I moved into, when I left Quaker, I moved into e-commerce in the early 2000s, and broadened my experience beyond just a functional skill into international and the digital economy. So. And then in phase three is when I started to take on some senior leadership positions. So you mentioned I was CFO of Fantdango and CFO of Dollar Shave Club, and currently president of Creator IQ. So I'm building on the phase one functional skills and the phase two business, broader business skills to apply those as a leader in the company. The companies that I've been at. So that's kind of how I look back at my my career and the journey that I took.
So certainly a broad mix of experience there. One thing that really struck me from what you said is that you worked out and moved out to China in the mid-90s. For me, that was really the time of, I suppose, it opening up. I know Nixon obviously opened up kind of relations with Mao Zedong in the 70s, but really I think in the 90s was really when China, with the Clinton administration, had the recession into the WTO, etc., and they had a massive rise in the middle class. So I'm curious to dig into that and really understand, from an internationalization perspective, what that was like as a culture shock. And then, when you're recruiting folks and you're trying to grow a business, like, how does the profile of a rock star change internationally? What is it, the kind of proclivities you look for? And just take us through that experience, if you would.
Yeah. So in my career, that was the most important phase of my development when I moved overseas. So I would encourage anyone who has a chance to take an expat assignment to really seriously consider it, because your growth expands exponentially when you're in those jobs. So that was definitely the case for me. I was able to, take on broader responsibilities, which is often the case when you're an expat. I also challenged by, as you mentioned, adapting to a new culture that was very different from my own. It was also more of a third world environment versus where I come from. So all those challenges helped me to become more adaptable and figure out how to solve problems that I, previously didn't know how to solve. So it was a great experience for me. In terms of recruiting talent in those markets, for me, the formula is not very different. I'm looking for people who are functionally competent, and competent is a low bar, right? Like, I'm looking for much more than competent, but I really press on, do the people that I'm interviewing, have they been there? Have they done that? To what degree have they done it versus just watch somebody else do it, right? And then, are they willing to roll up their sleeves and really dig in, or are they more of a supervisor who lets other people do it? So I lean towards somebody who's willing to roll up their sleeves and who actually has done that. And then lastly, how well do they relate to people? Because at the end of the day, it's all about, you've got to be able to get things done. You've got to be able to work with others. So are you somebody that people are going to want to work around, and can you collaborate and build relationships? So if those three elements are, present, then there's a good chance they're going to be successful. And I think those are universal traits, at least for me, when I'm recruiting talent. So it was a little bit harder in China at that time because, to find people that had that functional skill, because China was still moving into Western culture and Western levels of business, practices. So we had to look a lot harder and a lot longer. I think that's not so much the case anymore, but back then it was harder to find people that had that skill, but we were eventually able to do it.
So Dan, I want to hone in on the kind of CFO stuff. It seems you've spent a significant amount of time in those kind of roles, and now, as you say, when the culmination of your three phases of your career has kind of resulted in merging that with business acumen and international experience, and currently you're the president now of Creator IQ. I want to talk about what that means in terms of being a president of an organization in a minute. But right now, in terms of a CFO, they're oftentimes called the steward of company capital, right? And
yep.
You would have a view that's probably non-partisan to any given business or product line, and the general consensus is that objectively helps you to deploy capital in the most efficient way. And sometimes I'm sure that's unpopular. The way that you have done it sometimes. But in order to do that effectively, you probably need to know which programs, processes, and campaigns are working and which aren't, And I'm wondering,
yep.
what are the key things that inform you in those decisions? Do you have a particular framework or formula that you use to, to help you to deploy capital in the most efficient way?
Well, I think you described it in a very articulate way, John. That is definitely one of the main goals of a finance leader. And in terms of the methodology, it varies industry by industry. to figure out what are the metrics that drive the highest results in terms of deployment of capital, and then there's always a soft element, right? Like, well, if we give our employees some employee development, are we really going to be able to see that as a return on, based on some metrics? Yeah, some people will say yes, but in smaller companies, which I tend to work in companies under 500 people, sometimes under 50 people, it's harder to see. It's harder to put resources against to measure it. But sometimes you're just going to have to say it's the right thing to do, and you go ahead with that. So it's a blend of one. I tend to rely heavily on analytics. One of my first hires when I went to Dollar Shave Club was to bring in somebody to be head of analytics. When I was at Machinima, same thing. When I was at Overture, I didn't hire him, but he was given to me. I was head of international finance there. I got somebody who worked in analytics from a different department, and he became head of our international analytics. So it's the data analysis and analytics, and I like how you said it, because it's really how I try to operate. Is you try to be the honest broker, so that if one initiative is performing better than another, that's where we're going to put more of our chips. With that being said, I always talk to my marketing people and others and say, you got to save some chips for experimentation and trying new things, because at some point you'll run out of ideas. You'll run out of the ability to move the needle if you keep relying on the same thing. So put some chips in experimental and new, and I don't care if they get a payback immediately, but you got to keep trying some of that stuff, and once we figure out something that's working, then we'll move more chips into that.
Yeah, I actually love that description, because, and I've had, I suppose, the good fortune to work with some very, very good CFOs, and I think the challenge across technology organizations sometimes is, the only function really is of a CFO are the controlling functions like accounting and auditing and reporting. But if the business advisor type role, if the CFO doesn't perform that correctly, then those skills are going to leave the finance organization, and somebody else is going to be driving those agendas in organizations, from what I can see, because and particularly what you described there really was agile, right? People call themselves agile, but what I notice is they aren't taking one of the defining steps of agile, which is really pivoting from underperforming projects at a higher rate than other organizations that are apparently non-agile. Do you see that much? Or did you see that much as a CFO, that organizations aren't agile enough to move away from projects that are pretty much a busted flush?
Sometimes that is the case, for sure. I mean, it's human nature. People invest time in something, and they get emotionally committed to it, and they rationalize why it's going to work or why we need to do this. So sometimes my job has to be to shine a light on that, try to help people to see it, and then sometimes it's like, if they're unwilling to change, then you can get the changes you need just through budgetary issues, right? But not issues, budgetary means to defund something that isn't paying back. But what I'd say is, in the last 20 years especially, because the feedback loop is much greater than it was in times past. In the digital economy, you can track the metrics that were harder to track. You can see performance and get feedback in much more real time than when I was at Quaker Oats, building a brand took a long time, and the signals were more indirect. Here you can get very direct signals. So people in the digital space, I think, are a little bit more tuned into more agile responses.
What markets do you decide to go for, and what drives that decision-making process when you're internationalizing an organization?
Yeah, thanks, Ross. So to that point, our current business, or when I was at Overture, which we also internationalized, was based in the U.S. So in both the case of Overture and which is a paid search business, and Creator IQ, what we do is we look at what is the market potential. We scope that out, and we run some models to anticipate what type of revenue we could realize from a particular market, and we build up our cost to go with that, and then that determines how we stack rank the markets that we're considering. So in the case of Overture and Creator IQ, Europe was our first market to enter, and when you look at Europe, what we were looking at in both cases is adoption of the product or technology that we were selling. So in the case of Overture, it was paid search. It was very new at the time. Most people didn't even really know what paid search was. So we looked at where there was adoption, and Europe was ahead of other international markets. And in particular, the UK was adopting a little bit faster than continental Europe. So we started in the UK, and then we expanded into Germany and France. In the case of Creator IQ, same thing. We're looking at who is adopting influencer marketing. It's happening around the world, but Europe's was more progressive and moving faster, and it's a big economic market. So the combination of rate of adoption and the size of the market dictated Europe would be our first entry for Creator IQ. So that's the methodology that we wound up using.
Yeah, that's interesting and very much echoes my own experience. I ran a European sales team at ScriptLogic, and Germany and the UK were 40% each of my number. A lot of quarters. Yeah. The reason for that is they're very progressive, as you said. They're very developed, mature Western economies. Both of them have, 65 million in the UK, and Germany's now north of 80 million. So significant markets for sure. I'm very curious to know around your decision-making processes there. And it was very much my experience at HubSpot as well, where they took decisions based on where they were getting demand from. So what you were seeing was that because it was SaaS, you were getting leads in from specific countries. And it's a much easier process today to make those internationalization decisions, right? Because you know where the demand is coming from, and particularly with paid search and that whole what HubSpot used to term closed loop reporting. So you've got your advertising on your front end and your dollars on the back end, where you're able to trace that entire funnel journey. So I'm curious to know, you mentioned a little bit earlier about making gut level decisions, and now the analytics are a key part of that. Maybe could you share with us some of the best decisions you made from a gut perspective, and then maybe some of the ones that you make now today? And I'm talking about things like tools in your armory by way of deploying software, deploying teams, and kind of critical milestones. If you could maybe share with us some of those experiences.
Best gut decisions. Wow, I'll have to think about that one. I think the best gut decision was convincing my wife to marry me, but that's not on the business side. But yeah. I will say, if you make a good decision there on the personal side, it makes your career a much happier career, right? Like, your spouse is supportive, you have a happy life at home, much easier to get things done in the office when things are good at home. So don't underestimate that. So I'll put that down as best gut decision that helped my career. And then part two of your question, the analytics and the tools that we use. I don't have a defined playbook, Ross. But my I guess go-to is trying to hire talented people that are curious and I mentioned it before, functionally competent, right? So when you bring in people that have that combination, and you put them in a situation where you need answers, they're usually able to dig into things, or able to find data that wasn't previously available, connect dots. So for me, it really starts with hiring the right kind of people that have the and I go back to functional competence. Everybody I hire wants to grow, wants to be challenged in new things. So I'm not saying you have to hire people and just put them in jobs they already know how to do, but they do need to have a certain amount of baseline. And I've occasionally been in situations where I have somebody working for me who is in over their head, and that's no fun. It's not fun for them, and it's not fun for me. So you want somebody that knows if you're going to throw them in the deep end, they know how to swim, and you may have to teach them new things, but they're able to swim on their own, right? And so that's kind of number one thing for me, is making sure we hire talent that is capable, and then give them the rope to go and get it done.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more there. I mean, and I think it's also about hiring people that are motivated. As kind of senior leaders in tech, we hold the firm belief that it's not your job to motivate people. You hire highly motivated people, and then you inspire them. And I think that is I think that's the fundamental difference. So you've been with Creator IQ for 6 years as a board member first, and now as president. What do you like about the company?
Yeah, Creator IQ, we're in an industry which is influencer marketing that is exploding, and that just makes it really fun, right? So to see the growth of an industry, and it's the type of it's a space that pretty much every marketer is using influencer marketing. I rarely run into somebody who tells me they're not doing influencer marketing. So, but it's still very early days. It's like when I go back to my early days in paid search, most companies were also in paid search, in the early 2000s, but most of them weren't really leaning into it. And that's kind of the situation here at Creator IQ. Almost everybody is doing influencer marketing, but only a few are leaning into it. And back in the paid search world, those who leaned into it got a competitive advantage. And it didn't last forever, because now, of course, everybody's doing paid search. There is no advantage. It's just table stakes. But in those early days, people built businesses and gained market share because they were doing something different. And that's what we're seeing our clients doing. Those that are leaning into influencer marketing are taking market share away from those who are just dabbling. So it's fun to be in that emerging, growing category. It just creates a lot of excitement. There's a lot of growth. There's a lot of youth and vitality. So most of the people who are in the space, they're not my age, right? They're people in their 20s or early 30s who started working this a few years ago, and 5 years ago when it first came out, and now they're the experts. So that makes it a fun place to be.
Very good. And is it challenging, do you think, not necessarily in this environment, but as business progresses and business models change and markets change and consumer behaviors and trends change, is it becoming more challenging, do you think, to find really high-level talent?
I haven't found it difficult. So, I mean, talent. I don't think talent is any less available than in the past. It may be committed. The talent may be working someplace else, and I can identify it, but I can't bring it in. But identifying it is, there's a lot of talent out there. Now, I'm usually able to be maybe a little bit more successful in recruiting talent because I have, the good fortune of having a track record of success and being able to pick companies that are going to do well, right? So when I speak to someone, they usually have seen my background and they say, like, how did you figure out, like, Dollar Shave Club is going to be such a good, and Fandango is going to be, and I'm like, well, that's one of my superpowers, and we can talk about that later, but that helps me to recruit talent, right? Because people believe that I'm going to be able to be with a company that is going to be successful, and very often people are leaving jobs where they're making more money than they'll be making at Creator IQ because they want the career opportunity, the excitement, the career development, and the potential for outsized return if we have a good exit. So those are the things that allow me to recruit the talent after they're identified.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds really like a cool place to work at on the surface. Dollar Shave Club, we all remember the videos, and it seems like it was a successful exit there, etc. And we might delve into that at another time. But in terms of Creator IQ, what's the mission? As somebody who's kind of tasked with providing that strong leadership for the company by working with the board and all the other executives, right, to establish your short and long-term goals and plans. What's the mission? If you were to distill it into one sentence, like is it we want to acquire X amount of customers or Y amount of revenue, or we want to grow our employee numbers to to Z, or what's the core mission for Creator IQ right now?
Yeah, our core mission is really about helping our clients be successful in running their influencer marketing campaigns. So, and in order to do that, we approach it a couple different ways. One is we constantly building improvements to the product. So half of the company is in product or engineering, and the other element is providing great service to our clients. So 25% of the company headcount is based in customer support, customer success, customer enablement. So you got 75% of all resources are about how do you give back to the client better product or better service. So we're very client focused, trying to keep them happy and make them successful.
Okay, so I guess one of the things I'm curious on, you've been involved in some significant organizations that have gone through what I would deem to be hyper growth, right? So we've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of clients who are in that zone. I suppose, and I'm curious as well on the 25% allocations to customer success as well. And we had a call last week with Kevin Parker, who very much echoed that sentiment. And I'm curious to know, is it possible to scale too quickly and fail? And maybe can you tell us some of the safeguards you put in place that have allowed you to scale appropriately and realize that kind of return from a VC perspective and market expectation perspective, if you would?
Yeah, it's a great question, especially someone who comes from a finance background as I do. It's something I think about quite often. So the good news, Ross, is there are metrics that in the SaaS world that give you an idea. Are you investing too quickly relative to your growth? Usually, if you stay within those guidelines, then you're able to demonstrate to potential investors that you're getting a good return on your investment. So you may be cash flow negative, but you're hitting your growth metrics within a certain cash burn, and therefore, when you go out to raise money, you can demonstrate that this is a good investment for the venture capitalist. So two of those metrics that are fairly common in the SaaS world. One is called it's called the Rule of 40. So that is essentially what is your year-on-year growth rate minus your cash burn rate. So if you're growing at 100% and your cash burn is 60% negative, so 100% minus 60% is 40%. That is a good ratio if you're a good trade-off between cash burn and growth. Another criteria, another formula is called capital consumption ratio, which is how much cash are you burning relative to the ARR, or that's a annual recurring revenue that you're bringing in, right? So those are two similar type of measurements, and we look at those often and try to stay within those guidelines. So that makes it a little bit easier because smart people have figured that stuff out before I showed up.
Okay, so there's some great ratios to know, and I know having worked at HubSpot with guys like JD Sherman, etc., they kind of explained the whole philosophy behind SaaS growth. And I suppose what's interesting for me, I come from originally a small family business background, 30 people, and everything was around profitability, right? So when you're an indigenous SMB, you're looking to retain profitability, and growth is important, but stability is more important, and comes with that, should I say, is profitability. But I suppose from an American business perspective, it's all about market share. And I remember being at a number of different town halls where the explanation was around negative is okay, and you can actually IPO as a company even when you're not profitable. And I know Salesforce went a decade and a half without it even being profitable, etc. But it's about market share and grabbing market ahead of the competition and turning on that profit tap when you see appropriate. Like for you, can you maybe just walk through that kind of mindset of negative, it's okay to burn cash and not be profitable, and then when do you decide to turn on the profit tap, as it were? Like, when does that decision come? Just it's a different philosophy that you need to adhere to in hypergrowth. Maybe you could just share with us some of your thoughts there, if you would.
Yeah. So this is something that we talk about at the board level, all the time, and we have a philosophy here that we've adhered to, every time before we go out and fundraise, which is the company has to be able to be profitable and self-sustaining, and we get to a place where we say, well, if we don't take our foot off the gas, then we're going to have to raise money, and we make a decision at that point of either raising money and keeping our foot on the gas, or pulling back and getting to profitability with the cash that we have in place. So it is a decision that we make, as opposed to there's only one answer, right? So I can take the fork of the road, go to profitability, or the fork of the road, keep burning cash, go for growth, and raise money. So we've come to that fork in the road 3 times. We've chosen to raise money in all 3 cases, but it was not inevitable that we would do that. So we were conscious and thoughtful about whether we raise money. Now, the criteria that we use, we looked at how fast is the market growing, is, if in all three cases, the market we felt was growing very rapidly, so we wanted to make an investment. But that wasn't before we raised our Series A, the market really wasn't growing for the first few years. So we actually operated within the very limited financial resources that we had, and we were operating break even really for the first 3 years. And that was because the market was still in a very nascent stage. And it wasn't until things started to pick up that we could justify raising money and putting our foot on the gas. So that's kind of it for me anyway. And being a responsible, I'd like to think of myself as a responsible board member and a responsible, executive. That's how we look at it. And our CEO, he's also, he's very practical and very responsible. So he doesn't like losing money. We're not an executive team that is saying we're gonna take this to IPO or it's gonna crash and burn. No, we're gonna run it responsibly, and if that means getting to profitability is the most responsible thing, we will do that.
Yeah, that's very interesting in terms of the investment metrics and looking at your business from a growth perspective. What are the key metrics you look at to really get a health check, like a daily or weekly health check for your business? What are the leading indicators that you most commonly look at? Even the top 2 or 3 would be fine, because everybody's different. Some people look at activity in terms of top of the funnel action. Some people look at all kinds of other stuff, but what stuff do you like to look at to get a relative health check for the business, apart from the stuff you've already spoken about? What are the key leading indicators you look at?
Yeah, so we have weekly meetings on a few things at the executive level. One is customer satisfaction and ultimately churn. How do we mitigate that?
How are you measuring customer satisfaction? Do you do net promoter and that kind of thing?
We do that, but we look at other criteria also. So we have more of I call it a balanced scorecard. So we look at user activity, right? We look at number of tickets. If there's a high number of customer support tickets. We also look at, are the tickets outstanding for longer than we want them to be? We look at executive relationships. So do we have a close relationship beyond just the user, the user's boss or the user's boss's boss, and we're helping him or her solve problems at a strategic level. And then we look at what's the last criteria I just had?
Churn, probably. Do you look at churn?
Well, all that leads to churn, right? Like if you have or avoid churn. If you have high usage, the satisfaction at the user level is high, and you have a good relationship at the executive level. That all results in a positive score in terms of overall client satisfaction. And if issues come up and you have that relationship at the executive level, usually what happens is you get a phone call, but when something's not right, like if it's not getting resolved at the low levels, I'll get a phone call, and then I can get on it. But if you don't have that level of relationship and it's only at the user level, if we're not happy for some reason, it goes up to the boss, and then she doesn't have a relationship with us, and then she calls, or somebody does an inbound to her, and suddenly she's willing to listen, right? So it's important to have great usage at the user level, but also a strong relationship at the client level, at the executive level.
Very good. Couldn't agree with you more on that. Pretty quickly, in recent months with the COVID-19, etc., have you noticed any change in your customer acquisition costs or your lifetime value trends? Have they gone up or down, or are they the same, or kind of what are you noticing there?
Yeah, so what we're seeing post-COVID is the marketing costs have gone down. The time to close a deal has gone up, right? So, and just to give you, some real life example. So we were very close to closing a deal with a large retailer, in mid-March, and post-COVID, they went to work from home, and we couldn't even get in touch with them for about 6 weeks. I think we didn't have mobile phone numbers because they only gave their office numbers. They probably had difficulty moving people into the work from home environment because they mostly worked at desktop machines. So their internal organization kind of ground to a halt as they adapted to the work from home environment. So 6 weeks later, they finally responded, and so we lost 6 weeks there. And then that organization had to adapt to their own working from home. Used to walk down the hall, go to the purchasing department, and easy to get things done. Now they have changes in their internal behaviors. So that has taken, that has resulted in deals just taking longer to get done, right? So what I've seen though is we're starting to see that get caught up, and like the pipeline, in Q3 looks very strong. It was good in Q2, but just deals, took longer. So now some of those deals are actually closing in July. So anyway, that's one of the impacts. Oh, by the way, back to Ross's original question about the metrics that we look at on a day-to-day basis. It's those customer health scores, and also pipeline is the second one. So I kind of alluded to that in just a minute ago.
No, that's perfect, and those certainly are key and really important levers in any tech organization. Lesson learned anyway. Going forward, you're going to hard code. You're going to hard code that line into your CRM system to capture executives' mobile phone numbers.
Yeah, there you go.
That's one of the key criteria now to enter into the CRM system in the field. Hard coded in is the executive's mobile telephone number. We're going to switch it up a bit here as we kind of round to a close, and it's really about yourself, Dan. Like, if you could turn back time and talk to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell him? What advice would you give him?
Yeah, what I would say is, from a career perspective, what you want to do is maximize your knowledge. Seek. There are three primary things people seek for in careers, right? One is dollars, or pounds or euros, whatever, right? That's the economic return. Another one is the prestige of title, right? And advancing a title. And then the third one is knowledge and skills. And what I would go back and tell myself is over-index almost exclusively on skills, right? Skills and knowledge. If you have the skills, you will be paid the euros for those skills eventually, and you will get the title that is worthy of those skills. But sometimes people focus on the money, or they focus on the title instead of the skills, and they can get into a situation where your title has surpassed what your skills are, and that results in career stagnation, and not just short-term career stagnation. It can be perpetual stagnation, right? Because you overextended yourself, and you've got that VP title, but you really don't have the VP skills. And then what happens is people don't want to hire you as a senior manager anymore, because they're like, well, he's a VP, so I don't want to hire him. I think it's too much of a step down, but he's not really a good VP, so I'm going to pass. Then the only jobs you can get are VP jobs at companies that are willing to take a VP who isn't really up for the task. And those aren't the great companies, right? They're the companies that can't hire, legitimate VPs, so they stretch for you. So then you wind up getting into this perpetual cycle of working at companies that aren't the top companies. They're the ones that stretch to bring in somebody that is not really at the level, right? So that's what I would tell myself. Go for skills. You will be paid for your skills. So you just keep looking, and it's true mid-career also, right? Not just early stages of your career. I talked about phase 1, 2, and 3. It's true in all phases. Take those jobs where you're going to work around people. They're going to make you better, so that when you leave that company, you're going to be able to move into a better position than you just left. So, and for me, it was almost, I said I was in phase 1 for at least 12 years, and phase 2, it was very much deep learning, probably for another 8 years. So for me, it was like 20 years of really like skill development is like the primary thing that I was getting, and it allowed me to achieve what I've achieved. So that's what I tell myself. I kind of got there through good fortune, but now looking back, I can say, wow, if I had to do it again, it's definitely that path to take.
Wow, that's incredible advice. I'm glad I asked you that question. It's kind of like, the old saying, do you want to be rich or do you want to be a king? But there's a third option is, be the best and invest in yourself and your skills, and the world is your oyster then, is the message that I'm hearing anyway.
Yeah,
I absolutely love that answer as well. And I suppose I'm very much a wear your heart in your sleeve kind of guy, and very open and transparent. I suppose my curiosity, just one final question, if I may, Dan, is how does that come out in your leadership style? Like, what does being a leader mean to you, and how do you set that tone for culture in your organization?
Yeah, for me, what I care about is some of this I've mentioned before, but I'll say it again, is hiring people that are highly functionally competent. So if I'm hiring somebody in human resources, I want him or her to be really strong, right? So when people look at my organization and they say, oh, well, that person's an A player, she's an A player, he's an A player, they really know their job, right? So that's, a way that I demonstrate, leadership by hiring talent. And then secondly, I want to make sure that talent is empathetic and, has a high EQ, right? So there are a lot of finance people who are technically competent, but they're not great people, and I try to shy away from them and get people who can relate. So as we talked about at the beginning of the conversation, being able to help people to understand how to move your chips onto the higher performing bets, that sometimes takes coaching and relationship building. So that's the second one from a leadership perspective. Great hire functional talent that knows how to work well with people. And then the third, willing to roll up your sleeves. And we have some saying at Create IQ is being, everyone has to be willing to take out the garbage, right? And so if you have those three together, that people look up to individuals or organizations that are competent. They have empathetic people who are willing to roll up their sleeves and take out the garbage. Most people want to work around people like that. And so I would say those are elements of my leadership that is reflected in my team and who I hire and how I think of myself.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I couldn't agree with you more. I've actually worked with a number of people who have like savant levels numerical ability, but their personality just wasn't there to interact with the senior leadership team. So it became a real challenge. I think that's absolutely spot on. Well, look, Dan, I really want to thank you for sharing some tremendous insights on today's discussion. It's been very, very valuable for our listeners, and we look forward to speaking with you again and on future shows, we hope.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks, John. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Dan. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to somebody of your caliber, and I've no doubt that our audience will glean some really powerful insights from that conversation. The only thing I'd ask of you is maybe we might have you on the show again.
That'd be great. I would love to do that.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you both very much.
Peace.
You've been listening to the Global Tech Leaders Podcast, designed for both established and aspiring career-focused tech rock stars, as well as helping leadership figure out how to speak global in today's multicultural world. For further details, check out sf-talent.com.